Hello, YouTube. So I wanted to make a quick video about this whole Bible thumping wingnut rape thing, right? Because I think the atheists on YouTube are sort of missing the point, right? There's Bible thumping wingnut, without realizing it, is playing a shell game between two different contexts, right? If somebody were to walk up to me and said, "Oh my God, your friend has been raped," right? My what I would say immediately is, "Oh my God, that's horrible," right? That's, if you like, that's absolutely wrong, right? That's terrible, right? There would be a moral judgment that 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 leaves my mouth immediately, right? That's an ethical judgment that I'm making, or a moral judgment that I'm making, right? And that moral judgment is contingent on the practical context, right? It's a question of ordinary language, right? Um, that's the level at which Bible thumping wingnut is asking, can you say that it's absolutely wrong or something like that? He's asking you to make a practical, ordinary language moral judgment on the thing in the same sense that in the context that I was saying, right? Shell game occurs because I can make that statement. I don't feel unjustified in making that statement. It's not a problem for me to make that statement, right? Within that practical context. Now, if you were to ask me, according to what meta-ethical theory can you justify that, right? Can you justify something like absolute, you know, that's absolutely wrong or something like this? Then we enter a different kind of conversation. We enter a different language game, right? We enter a philosophical language game. We're talking about meta-ethics at that point, right? So you have one context wherein which you see something and you go, "Oh my God, that's fucking terrible," right? And you're justified in doing that, right? There are certain rules in play when you make a moral judgment within an ordinary language scenario, and then there are different rules in play when you try to pick apart various forms of meta-ethics and the implications therein, and blah 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 blah, right? So these are the two things that Bible thumping wingnut is dancing between without realizing it, right? Point is that when somebody says, when somebody, when Bible thumping wingnut asks the question, "Can you say that this gang rape was wrong?" He's asking you that within the context of an ordinary language question, right? And the atheists on YouTube don't seem to get that, right? They don't seem to get that Bible thumping wingnut, in asking that question, is not asking you for some meta ethical theory, right? He's asking you in an ordinary language context, in the context of your friend walking up to you and saying, "Your friend has been raped." And you say, "Oh my God, that's horrible," right? That's the question that he's asking, right? So is is this girl being raped absolutely wrong? Absolutely, it's wrong, right? Like, when I make that judgment is again contingent on a certain set of rules and normative regulations and blah 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 that structure ordinary sort of moral judgments, and I can make that judgment without batting an eye. The atheists hear that and then think, for some reason, they'll say all these things like, "Well, rape, you have to tie it to, in order to make any kind of moral judgment, you have to tie it to context and blah 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 blah." And they begin unpacking a sort of meta ethical theory about rape, right? This is this is this is this is not the question, right? Um, the reason why Tim's playing a shell game is because he's asking you a question within the context of moral language, of ordinary moral language, right? He's asking you that question, and then depending on your response, he's shifting to a meta-ethical question, right? So he's saying, "Can you condemn this as wrong?" So he's asking you for your ordinary language judgment. And then he'll ask you, "Well, how can you say that that's wrong?" And then slip try to slide into this meta-ethical conversation, which is just a different context of language. It's a different space of discourse, right? Saying morality is subjective, morality is objective, which is stupid to begin with, but saying morality is this, there is mind independent morality, right? I'm a moral cognitivist, I'm a moral non-cognitivist, whatever you like, right, is obviously not the appropriate answer, right? So if, again, somebody walks up to you and says, your friend has been raped, right? You say, oh my God, that's terrible, right? What you don't do is to say, well, you know, within what context was she raped, or blah 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 blah, right? Like this is not the question, or this is not what's being asked of you. See what I mean? So point is that there's a distinction between the ethical and the meta-ethical. And Bible thumping wingnut is asking you an ethical question, and he's asking you an ethical question as if it's the same thing as a meta-ethical question. So when I hear that story, that rape story, right, I go, oh my God, that's absolutely horrible, right? And I think I'm justified in saying that. I think I'm right within the bounds of ordinary language. It makes perfect sense to say that's absolutely wrong, right? Now, that's not the same thing as asking me for a meta-ethical analysis of what absolute wrongness is in some configuration, right? So there's this talking past each other that's happening, and I think Tim is sort of almost without knowing it willfully creating this slippery situation, right? But I think that it's our duty as atheists, right, who are representing our positions, right, in all of this, to be able to recognize though when somebody is slipping between two language games like this, right? Like there's the immediate ordinary situation, and then there's the theoretical abstract. How can you justify that claim? How can you blah blah blah? Right? That stuff isn't relevant to Bible thumping wingnut's question about you look at this gang rape. Is that absolutely wrong? Right? I might have repeated myself repeatedly there, but I cannot drive this home enough. The meta-ethical and the ethical are not the same thing. They're different language games. They have different rules that govern them, right? There are different norms and regulations that govern what propositions are meaningful, what propositions aren't meaningful, how, what you are justified in saying, what you're not justified in saying, blah, 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 and all of this, right? To say something, to make an ethical claim can have meaning even if you can't necessarily meta-ethically substantiate that. And to make a meta-ethical claim can have meaning even if you would never say that, right? So if you were to say something, this is what Bible thumping wingnut doesn't understand. If you were to meta-ethically say, well, all actions are tied to some context, and therefore I need to know what the context is before I can make a judgment, and blah, 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 right? If you hold that meta-ethical position, it does not for a moment mean that if your friend walks up to you and says, oh my God, this person has been raped, at no point in your reaction would you appeal to something like, well, what happened during that event? Was she, blah, 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 blah. You wouldn't consider this meta-ethically, right? These are two different things happening at the same time within Tim's question. And the answer is not to say, I arrive at this judgment subjectively, blah, 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 blah. It's not to do all of these sort of pseudo-philosophical games, right? The answer is to just simply say, you're asking me a question within the context of ordinary language about a rape, And within that context, I'm fully justified in saying, no, this is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. This is terrible. I can't believe this happened. Blah, 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 blah. Right? Just so we're clear, these are two different spaces of discourse. Tim is playing a shell game between them, and the atheists on YouTube are not understanding this, right? They're not getting that there are two different contexts that are taking place at the same time. And this is what allows Tim, when an atheist makes a meta-ethical claim, to equivocate that with an ethical claim. See what I mean? And then therefore to judge, you make a meta-ethical claim, Tim judges that as an ethical claim, right? So when you say, well, you need to tie things to context, blah, 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 you make a meta-ethical statement. For Tim, this is the same thing as a person walking up to you and saying your friend has been raped, and you say, well, we have to look at the context, and we have to do all that. Like, you see what I mean? Like, these are two different worlds that are being juggled. So stop and think about this, right?